A man chooses, a slave obeys.
Welcome to the Ethics in Video Games podcast, where we explore issues at the intersection of ethics and video games.
What follows is a series of graphic, interactive scenes that we can't show you.
All right, Andy. So, we hear people complain about the responsibilities of game companies all the time. In fact, we have discussed the responsibilities of game companies many times,
Sure.
right? Let's just, I wanted to start just by firing off some ideas about the responsibilities of game companies that we talked about.
Okay.
All right. You want to go first? Grab one of these?
Sure. Yeah. We talked about that it's irresponsible for a game company to glorify war, to glorify the Iraq War and 6 Days of Fallujah. That it would be irresponsible and hurtful for them to do that.
Right. And remember, we had in episode 2, we talked about the monetization schemes and how it would be irresponsible for game companies to manipulate their players, right, to make money from them.
Right. Similarly, it would be, it's back again to the way that things are portrayed. It would be irresponsible for a game company to over-sexualize certain people, sexualize female characters, objectify women, or even perpetuate other sort of racist and sexist ideas.
Okay. Or if we think about, right, remember we talked about censorship in Valve, right? And and Steam, how it would be irresponsible for them they have a responsibility to kind of have some sort of set rules, right? So that both developers and gamers know what they're getting in the store. How about like one or two more?
Sure. We've got we talked about pedophilia and how it would be irresponsible for games to portray pedophilia in a way that glorifies that.
Okay, great. Let me throw this one in. How about things like game companies like Epic have a responsibility not to let cheaters get away with cheating, right, in their tournaments?
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah, sure.
Which we talked about cheating the first episode, and our next episode, where we interview Celia Holden. We're going to talk about responsibilities that game companies have not to create a hostile environment for female employees.
Right.
Okay, so notice that's a lot of responsibilities, or at least claims of responsibilities. But kind of what's missing from this is, how do you answer that question? How do you answer the question of, what are game companies responsible or not responsible for, right? Maybe they're not responsible for any of this stuff. Maybe the players are responsible. Maybe parents are responsible. Maybe the government is responsible. So what I thought we'd do today is talk kind of go big, right? As big as we can about the general responsibilities of corporation. And then we'll look at these as how they apply to game companies. And we'll see if we could take the kind of responsibilities that we were just talking about and imagine how a game company would take some of these and regard their responsibilities differently if it kind of we're convinced by these different models of corporate social responsibility. Okay, so the models of social responsibility we're going to talk about, essentially I got from my business ethics textbook that I used to use by Hartman and Jardin, which I've always found to be really, really helpful. There's different models, different ideas of corporate social responsibility out there. Essentially, the idea of corporate social responsibility is what is the social responsibility of a company? Right?
Because they have other responsibilities too. Like we talked, I think we mentioned their fiduciary responsibilities, right? They have a responsibility to make money for their shareholders,
which is actually usually taken to be part of their social responsibility, right? The shareholders are going to be one stakeholder, but let's start with that one, right? So the first one, and these kind of grow in. Well, you'll see. The first one is the economic model. Essentially, it says, look, the responsibility of companies is to make money for their investors, right? They need to do this within the law, right? They can't cheat their customers, or at least not cheat them in illegal ways. They have to promise. They have to give them what they promised, and that's about it, right? That's what a business is for, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's just take this model real quick, right? Think of a game company, right? Think of any of the kind of responsibilities that we talked about. How might a game company apply this model?
Well, it feels like it's a model that allows them to lean very heavily on law, right? So they can say if it's legal, it's ethical.
Right. Well, right. Or if it's legal, you can say it's within our. Sorry, if it's not illegal, we can do it.
Right.
Right.
And in fact, the reverse of that I found in highly competitive situations is also true, which is if it's not illegal, you must do it.
Right, which is interesting, right? Because if you, and we talked about this when it came to cheating, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is a different context because that was cheating, and you had to, there's a whole crew that was backing you up, and you had responsibilities to them. But it's interesting, right? If you're competing, right? If I'm one company and I'm competing with another company,
Mm-hmm.
you might say I owe it to my shareholders, right, to do everything I can to outcompete them to make the shareholders more money.
That's right.
Right. Yeah, which is really interesting. If it's not illegal, it's going to make you money. You've got to do it.
Right.
Okay, so if we think about, let's say, let's just think of a couple that we've talked about. So number one, the 6 Days in Fallujah thing, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was maybe a little more complicated. Let's go simple. Let's go sexually objectifying female characters in the game.
Okay.
That one's pretty clear, right? If you're a game company and you're making a game that has sexualized female characters, what does the economic model tell you got to do?
Right. Well, and that's interesting because there's a lot of research recently that says that it doesn't actually matter. That it used to be that it was thought that because video games were being sold to basically teenage men, teenage guys, that this was the way to higher sales. But it turns out it's not necessarily the case.
Right.
That there's plenty of other people that we're leaving. There plenty of other money that we're leaving off the table because we are making it look like they're not welcome.
Right. So the idea here, first of all, I gotta say I was surprised by that because I've always enjoyed the sexualization of women in games, but the fact that I enjoy it doesn't make it, doesn't say anything about whether it's right or wrong, right?
Right.
I've enjoyed the skimpy outfits, right? And it was targeted towards people like me. So
Exactly.
I would have thought that it made my experience more enjoyable. I would have thought that made a difference financially. And if it did make a difference financially, the economic model would say that you would have to do it. But as you point out, recent research seems to point kind of the other way, that maybe it doesn't make a difference, and you're also excluding women who might be turned off by it,
who love to play games,
right? Who love to play games, right?
But look at these games and go, oh, this is not for me. This was not made for me. This was made for someone else.
So on the economic model, it's pretty clear. What's the answer? The answer is whichever one of these is going to make you more money, as long as they're both legal, which they are. Right.
Right.
Your obligation to your shareholders is to do whatever is going to make you the more money. Right.
Right.
Okay. Now, take another one. What about let's take Steam. Now, Steam is not a corporation, but let's just ignore that. Right.
Well, I mean, yeah. Right. They're publicly they're not publicly traded, but they're
a privately owned company.
Privately owned company.
Right. So, but they do have investors.
Yeah, they have investors, of course.
Right. So let's say we talked about a bunch of the games that they banned. Right. Mm-hmm. So what does this tell us about their censorship policy?
Well, if we are looking at the economic model, we have to assume that they're making the choice that makes them the most money, right?
That's it. Right. Every time. Right. Should they allow active shooter, that game where you shoot up your own high school? Well, if they think that they're going to make more money from it, then by banning it, then that's what they should do. They should allow it, right? The decision is completely based only on right, the economic aspect of it, as long as it's legal.
Right.
Okay, so this is pretty simple. Okay, so
Right, and I should say this is the model that gets a lot of derision.
okay, well,
Right. I mean, we talk when we talk about, oh, it's the bean counters making this decision. That's, frequently it's a decision we don't like, but we recognize that it probably makes the company more money.
and and you can think about it as the creativity versus the money, right? And
Right.
and
Frequently, that's couched that way. Like they're turning down a good idea because they don't like the way that it makes money, or they don't like that it doesn't make enough money, or whatever. But it's basically some sort of derision, some sort of derisory note about the bean counters,
right.
or about like, oh, they're only doing it because it makes money, in some sort of ethical sort of discussion, right?
Right. Though notice, right, we're like they're greedy, right?
Right.
We blame them for being greedy. Though notice this takes it away. Sometimes people talk about companies make financial rather than moral decisions. But notice what the economic model does. It says, look, the moral responsibility of the company is to make money, right? The
Right.
company is obligated to make money for its shareholders. So whatever like a company like Steam decides, right, has to be the financially right decision.
Right.
Okay, so let's go to let's go to the next model. So the next model essentially begins with the economic model, but okay, the next model is called the philanthropic model. It says,
Mhm.
okay, companies have this primary responsibility to make money for their shareholders. But at the end of the day, they could also, if they want, right, do some good in the
Mm.
world, right? So to go back to our sexualization, right,
Mhm.
of female characters, right? If they want, they can choose, right, to help reduce the objectification of women in the world by reducing them in video games, by taking them out of their game. They don't have to, right? But their responsibility to their shareholders isn't so strong so that they can't leave some money on the table to do the right thing if they want.
I see. So basically, that just says that doesn't say that they have a responsibility to do anything. It just
Right.
says that their responsibility for the other thing is not as strong. It's not so absolute.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. So,
Okay.
right. Think about the modernization issue, right? Let's say, everything in FIFA 21, right, tries to
Mhm.
push you towards buying loot boxes so you can get your ultimate team, right? Is there anything wrong with that? And let's say, the economic model is going to say, well, if it makes us money, it's what we got to do. The
Right.
philanthropic model is going to give EA some flexibility here, right? It's going to say, well, okay, EA, if you guys want to do the right thing, if you guys, think, hey, look, um, this is manipulative, even though it's legal. We really shouldn't do it. It would be wrong to do. Let's help people out, and so
Right.
we're going to refrain from doing it. You can do that. You don't have to, go all the way to make money.
Right. So let me say that it seems weird to me that that this thing is called philanthropy when
R-
it's in fact nothing like philanthropy, right? Like the idea that I'm getting some sort of like kudos for philanthropy, which sounds like a good thing, by not doing an evil thing. Like,
Right.
why am I getting a parade for that?
Right, but it's interesting. The reason for it is because the examples are usually things like, let's say Epic decides to give a bunch of college scholarships
Sure.
to people.
Right, but
Uh,
that's a very different thing than saying Epic has decided uh, not
Manipulate.
to manipulate
Right.
their people into giving them more money.
Right.
Right.
And I think you've got a really good point there, right? I think we tend to focus on the philanthropy part when really I think the more important part is the responsibility to make money is not absolute, right? And
Right.
you can give up on that. But to turn to the philanthropy part, there is an interesting kind of difference between between the two. And notice when a company gives So let's say Epic could do that. Epic could give some highly publicized, college scholarships, right, to people who enter Fortnite tournaments, let's say, right, or some sort of raffle, with them, right. Now, Epic can do that for two different reasons. They could do it for the PR.
Sure.
Right? They're doing a nice thing for the world, but really, the economic model is going to say, hey, you can do that if you think it's going to ultimately make us more money, right? Because the PR part is going to help us do money, right?
Right. And most of the time when you make these sort of strategic decisions, you're making them based on the idea that you are actually doing more than one thing with the same move, right? I mean, anybody who's played chess understands that the best chess move is one that actually, presses two or three ideas forward at the same time.
And any company, you would think these days, has at least partly, they're always thinking about their brand. I mean, who doesn't think about their brand, right?
That's right.
But your rationale here, right? Again, with the economic model, it's only the expected outcome for your brand, right? Money-wise, that can work as a legitimate reason for doing it, right? Where in the philanthropic model, right, Epic can just give scholarships because it just thinks it's a really nice thing to do and it wants to help people out.
Right.
Or
I think there's also, I think this is kind of important too. There's a difference between, I think, like when I give money philanthropically, when I give money to a scholarship or to, Greenpeace or whatever it is that I'm giving money to, I know exactly how much that's going to cost me.
Okay.
When I choose to take a feature out of a game that I know would make me more money, I have an idea of how much money I'm leaving on the table, but I don't know for sure. And there's no way to ever know for sure, right? There's no way to say we lost exactly $100,000 this way, because we don't know. We would not know how much it would be more sales it would have made, because that was a timeline we didn't travel down.
Right, and the same goes for any PR impact you might get, right?
That's right.
Right, but of course, businesses make those calculations all the time, right? I mean, you take guesses, maybe you do some economics modeling to kind of see where it goes. I'm not sure exactly how this would work. But okay, but let's go back to our other kind of example, though, the manipulation example, right? So, okay, so I'm going to refrain in FIFA from manipulating you to kind of push you to get the loot boxes for your ultimate team. I'm going to do it out of the generosity of my heart, right? So again, right, the economic model says we can do that. EA can do that in order to use it as in PR to say, hey, look, we care about our players. EA sometimes has a bad reputation, right? This can uplift the reputation, and that could be an economic decision. So, right, the economic model could potentially be, okay, we're losing money up front, but we're going to get more of it, at the back end, right, because of our reputation, right? Where the philanthropy model is going to be, okay, we don't expect, even if we don't expect to ultimately make more money, we're still doing this because we think it's a good thing to do.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Our third model, right? Our third model is the social web model. And these models increase in kind of like your level of social responsibility. And in the third model, corporations are viewed in terms of they're viewed as corporate citizens, right? They're part of society, right? So corporations have rights, right? And along with those, they have responsibilities. And they have rights and responsibilities to other members of the community, just like you and I do, right? They're part of the community, right? So just like they have those rights, they also have responsibilities to the community, right? So this is where you get essentially the idea of, as a member, let's say, of the gaming community, right? What is the responsibility of Electronic Arts or Blizzard, right? Or Epic, right? Or Valve, right? Which is Valve, I think, is just really extra interesting because they're close to a monopoly.
Right. This model seems to take the idea of who is a stakeholder in the company and expand it beyond the people who actually just hold stock.
Right. So your employees are stakeholders. Your suppliers are stakeholders, right? Your customers are stakeholders. But even more than that, I think the community is a stakeholder, right? This idea, and I remember talking to a friend of mine about who does a lot of stuff for Twitch, who was telling me how much he thinks Twitch really sees themselves as a part of the gaming community and wants to be a responsible contributor to a healthy gaming community. And I think that kind of goes along with this kind of vision, right? What are you doing in relation to the community itself?
Right. Although in Twitch's case, there's a lot of that's their bread and butter too. So that I mean, saying that and being that way, their community is the community of gamers who then play games on Twitch and watch games on Twitch that provides them their income.
Right. And you might say, look, if that community is healthy, for example, let's say if that community doesn't is not very toxic, right? They want to reduce toxicity in the community, more people would participate and they will make more money. Right. So you might say, the economic model might say they have an obligation to do what they can to help the community out. Right.
So the social web model should suggest that Twitch would also want to do something that helps out the guy who never watches a Twitch video and never plays a game.
Right. But is a part of the gaming community.
It's just part of the community that he lives in.
Oh, I see.
Right?
Yes, that is true too, which is interesting, right? Because notice community.
Does Twitch do anything to help my great aunt? She never watches Twitch. She never plays games.
I think the way stakeholder theory is normally done is you have kind of primary and secondary and tertiary stakeholders.
But doesn't the social web model suggest that she's part of the society that Twitch lives in, and so therefore they have responsibility for her?
To some extent,
or to her, really.
I would say so. So I would say so. Let's look at the example we talked about with the sexualization of female characters. Right. So, I don't know if we've talked about this yet, but research shows that sexualization of female characters tends to increase rape myth acceptance, which is to say, it tends to lead to more objectification of women and to a greater propensity to accept things like, oh, she wanted it, she was asking for it, right? These kind of rape myths. Right. And you would think that this also ends up leading to more just sexual assaults. Right. Or other complications involving consent where consent is violated. Right.
Now, it stands to reason that it does, but I don't know that we have any evidence to link them directly. Right. But it stands to reason that it would. It stands to reason that people who believe that women who wear skimpy clothes are asking for sex are more likely to have sex with somebody who doesn't actually want to have sex with them.
Right. Or let's say yes, in some way. Though from what I understand, there's some correlation drawn at this point, but I'm not enough of an expert on this, right? But let's say it does, right?
Yep.
If it does, then let's say the company that makes Soul Calibur, right, if they're following the social web model, right, we need to consider, let's say, not just the immediate community of players, which is the gaming community. And the gaming community means that, let's say, it's making a choice that would, let's say, if our assumptions are right, impact its players in a way that is negative. Right, by, let's say, making them more sexist. And there has been evidence that shows that games like this do make you more sexist. So that's one community, but it also has a responsibility to a larger community, right? The one that would include, let's say, the women that would be the target of these players, right?
Right.
So it would, right? Because again, this idea, we're in a web of responsibilities, right? To our employers, to our suppliers, to our players, to people who are outside of the game world but are affected by the game world, right? Again, think of we talked about in the tobacco episode, we talked about addiction. Well, we have 2 episodes that touch on addiction, right? and you think about, let's say, addiction for kids, and addiction mostly doesn't affect kids. Video game addiction is mostly for adults, but with kids, it's particularly difficult. You might say the responsibilities you have are not just to the minor players, but also maybe to their parents because it affects the whole family,
Right.
or maybe even
Sure.
to society. Well, we talked about how South Korea is deeply concerned about the impact that video game addiction or excessive gaming or pathological gaming will have for society. So
Right, which they're measuring in some sort of national output, right?
exactly.
GDP.
Right. You're hurting the economy, right? You're taking people out of the economy. And, the economy needs people working to pay taxes, to keep the country running, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's the social web model. Okay?
Okay.
And finally, our last one, we're putting the burden even higher. The last one is called the integrative model. And the integrative model essentially says a company is not a moral company unless right from the get-go, as part of its mission, it essentially has some sort of, it contributes something good to society, right? So, I think of things like Ben and Jerry's. I know, right? They do a bunch of. They're like a B Corp. They do a bunch of good things. That again is part of their essential mission, right?
Right.
When the company that makes glasses, Harbor, that
Okay.
like they give, like, for every 3 pairs of glasses, I think they donate like a pair of glasses to poor kids. Right?
Okay.
There's a lot of I think what's the big shoe company, Zappo, I think, right? I think
Yeah, that's right.
I think they have something like this as well, right? Where some sort of charitable idea or some sort of positive thing that they're bringing in the world is a part of their very mission.
Right. The reason that they're in business is to make money to do this thing.
Well, I would say I don't think
I
it needs
mean,
to be that much, but part of the reason they're in business, right, is to provide the social service that's good for people, right? So if we look at, let's say, Facebook, right? Facebook originally kind of started with like this kind of social mission. We can connect the world. That's a
Right.
really positive idea, right?
Right.
I mean, it turned out to be a lot more complicated than that.
Right out of college, I worked for a company. I basically worked on a phone bank for a company that called people asking for. I was one of those people calling you at all hours of the day to ask you to donate to nonprofit organizations.
Okay.
The nonprofit organizations, of course, have their mission. Their
Right.
mission is very specific. This company was a company that its mission was to make money, but the specific way that it decided to make money was to raise money for these other causes.
That's interesting. Yeah, and notice, and that fits, right? That's the integrated model, right?
Right, and I don't know how it sounds integrated, but I would say that it wasn't particularly integrated because they weren't doing anything.
I see. Well,
Right.
it's actually interesting, right? So one thing to say about these models, and I want to get back to the integrative model in a second.
They charged the nonprofit organizations to do this, and the goal was that they would end up giving back more than they charged.
So it's not clear what their intention was, right? You might say
Right.
maybe they saw themselves as operating under the economic model, and they just saw a niche, right?
Right.
And
Right.
they used it. But here's how these models work, right? These models are not like descriptive of kind of your idea of what your company's responsibilities are, and they're not kind of a choice. Like we at Riot choose to follow the philanthropic model, right?
Mhm.
They're competing ideas
Mhm.
on what the actual responsibilities of companies are, right?
Right.
So for this company that you worked for, at least if the integrative model is right, they still seem to probably have, even if they did it for economic reasons, they are still doing good in the world, right? So they would still meet their responsibilities under the integrative model.
Right. Now, what if I told you that I could be calling for two different organizations that had absolutely contradictory interests?
Oh, that's interesting. So let's say you're a pro-choice or a pro-life organization.
Exactly.
They're both nonprofits. They both are doing the good. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. I think it's a good question.
It makes me wonder whether this model is just a bit of hand waving. And is this model anything more than just justification?
No, I think for most companies, it's not that easy to do this. I mean, mind you, it's easy to say we're going to donate 5% of our profits to this charity, right?
Right.
But again, notice you could do that under the philanthropic model, the economic model, right? Under any model.
This one seems to suggest that it has to be built in.
It
like
has
from the get-go. My company, I'm gonna make role-playing game books,
right?
And the reason I'm making role-playing game books is to donate X amount of my profits to this cause.
Part of the reason, right? So you're still making a business.
Why not all of it?
It could be all of it, but it has to be at least part of it.
Okay.
Right. So that's the idea, right? So again, let's say Steam's reason for existence is making money, but the integrative model would say, but it can't just be there to make money. It has to have an additional positive moral thing that it's trying to do to make the world better, whatever that would be, right? So if it's not doing that right now, it's got to add something in there. Otherwise, it's not really a moral company.
Right. I see. So let's take another example. My wife, a stand-up comic, sells T-shirts after her shows.
Okay.
Some of the T-shirts,
Jackie
Cation. Some of the T-shirts, the profits go directly into her pocket.
Right.
And then there's one of them that she uses, and the profits for that one go towards different causes. And when she decided to make that shirt, that was the deal. She made that shirt and the pins and the buttons and everything else that go along with that shirt. It's the White Lady Meat Shield shirt. All of the profits for those shirts go to a nonprofit.
Okay.
And she chooses a different nonprofit every time she hits $1,000 in profits. She sends off a check. In that case, the business decision to make that shirt was integrated, whereas the other shirts were entirely economic. Is that a way to think about that? Is that a good example?
In a way, but again, remember, our question is not like you're talking about the motivation that came, right, for doing this.
Right, exactly.
We're thinking about ultimately, right? And since we're talking about game companies, let's get back to the game companies, right?
Okay.
Ultimately, what are these game companies responsible for? And notice how the standard with these kind of goes up and up and up and up, right? With the economic model, they're responsible for making money and staying within the law. And you've done now, we're good, right? With the philanthropy model, they can also do some good if they want to, right? With the social web model, they have to meet their responsibilities, even if right. Because notice, right? Let's say Epic and cheating, right? In tournaments, right? Epic can crack down on cheating if they want to. Let's say in the philanthropic model, right? But with the social web model, they have a responsibility to the players to crack down on cheating, right? And they have to do it. It's not a choice,
right?
And with the integrative model, maybe I don't think you can have part of doing good in the world as stopping cheating, but again, maybe it has to do some additional good besides that.
Right. And would you say that a lot of the push to legislate things is to basically push social web ideas into basically make it legal, to make it a legal requirement,
right? And that's interesting,
and thus force companies that would otherwise not think of themselves as a social web company into behaving like a social web company for legal reasons.
Right. To me, that sounds right. Right. I mean, the law. What we try to do with the law, a lot of times people are very impressed by what's legal and what's not. And you and I, we've talked in this podcast about legal versus moral, right?
Right.
And
Right.
the way it goes is the law doesn't tell us what's moral. Morality tells us what the law should be, right?
Right.
And this drives a lot of things in terms of laws for companies, right? We
Right.
think
And
what
if you think of, I guess, if you think of we're not monolithic, right? Not even any one of us or any one corporation is monolithically any one of these models, right?
well, the idea is that it has to be. I mean, the idea is that this is when we say a company is being responsible,
Mm-hmm.
we one of these models or another competing model, right,
Mm-hmm.
is correctly describing what the range of responsibilities are, or
Mm-hmm.
how we should think about general responsibilities, right?
Right.
And one of these is correct, and if the company is not doing that, then it's doing something wrong. So let's say
But what I mean is that even within a company, there's all these different. These are all competing ideas, even within the company. So there's going to be people within a company who don't even think that, like that think that they're being fully ethical,
right,
and there are other people in the company who think that they're being fully unethical,
right,
just because a company is not monolithic, right? They have
sure.
all these different ideas competing within itself, right?
So let's take Electronic Arts, right, with the FIFA
Mm-hmm.
21 thing, right? So here we go. We're talking about some people in EA have this idea of, look, what we should try to do is we should really try to push everybody to buy boxes for their ultimate team. That's really where we're going to make our money. And they're
Mm-hmm.
essentially driven by, and let's say they're thinking, look, we got shareholders, we got investors. They're there to recoup their investment. That's where our responsibility is. That's what we got to do, right? That's what they're thinking. And you have this other group within EA that's saying, wait a minute, aren't we manipulating our users? And isn't this wrong? And don't we have
Mm-hmm.
responsibilities to players? And maybe they're going by like the social web model, right?
Right.
But the question is still going to be, well, who's right?
Right.
And that's what we kind of, that's ultimately the idea. It's not like just like you can think along those two models, but that one of them is right and the other one's wrong. And when we
Mm-hmm.
argue about what are the responsibilities of game companies, essentially at the end of the day, we need to have some sort of big picture idea of what are the kind of big picture responsibility, which model is the correct way to think about it.
Right. Right. And would it be useful um, for the heads of these companies to look at these models and go, this is the model we're going to run with. This is the model, and clearly state that to the people below, so that people below understand. Oh, right, this is the model we're running with. This is how we should be making decisions.
I think that would be awesome. In fact, I actually, for one of my classes, I have for their final paper, I have my students write a letter to the American public as Facebook CEO, outlining not only their specific policies about censorship,
Mm-hmm.
but also very clearly declaring what they think is the correct model and showing how this correct model goes along with their policy on censorship.
Right.
And I
Right.
and I get people choosing any of the four models, right? From
Okay.
economic to integrative,
Sure.
depending on the way they think a company should be run. And I think it'd be fantastic if the president or the board or whoever would make these decisions for a company would do that, and he would give a kind of guiding vision, I
Mm-hmm.
think, to everything from below that.
Yeah.
A really interesting thing, just to kind of throw that in before we finish, Andy,
Mm-hmm.
is Google. Because
Mm-hmm.
Google used to remember when Google's motto was "Don't be evil,"
Right.
right? And you
Did
know
they get rid of that? Have they dumped
they
that?
did,
Oh
they kind
wow!
of
So they're like, man, maybe evil is okay.
right. So they started with this is Sergey Brin grew up in the Soviet Union, right? One of the founders of Google, and when coming up with Google, he was worried about the kind of things that whether let's say a government can take Google and use it, right,
Mm-hmm.
in bad ways, and he wanted the "Don't be evil" to be part of the motto to kind of, Google was doing something fantastic for the world, right? Putting the
Mm-hmm.
world, I mean, Google's amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially I'm thinking about Google search because that's really
Yeah.
what before Alphabet came along and all that stuff, right? But this was a kind of Google has this positive mission, and they want to keep the kind of responsibilities to the community, right, in mind with their motto, "Don't be evil."
Right.
Then when they became Alphabet, they dropped the motto.
Right.
And it's interesting what their notion of their responsibility is now. They famously fired their ethics guy, who then went on to do the Social Dilemma movie, which everybody should see
Right.
on Netflix.
Yeah, interesting.
All right.
I wonder. So if we have a little bit of time, I'd like to propose a model.
Okay, let's do it.
So the way that we teach game design, we teach this idea. We teach an idea called the play-centric approach.
Okay.
So that is, whatever game design decisions you make, you have to be thinking about the player.
Okay.
So player first, right? Whatever is the best experience for the player so like a player experiential model, right? Where would that be a new model, or would that fit into one of these other four models? Like if we said, all right, well, we're gonna take that approach and apply it to my company. I'm gonna make games. I'm gonna publish games. I'm gonna be a big game company.
Here's how I would put it. I would put it that okay. I could say that this kind of policy might potentially be an economic model if you think that player first is the way to become economically successful. Philanthropic model if you think that player first is something nice that you want to do for the players. The social web model, if you think that, and I think probably the social web model is the most likely one, where you think that you have several stakeholders that you have responsibilities for, but the player is the primary and most important one of these, right? As opposed to, let's say, your employees, which might need to work 100, hours a week, right, to give you the kind of game that would be good for the player, right?
Right.
Or maybe the integrative model, which might say that you need to do something good for the players. That one is kind of harder to see. It's possible.
Yeah. So okay, so even within that sort of that play-centric approach, that player first approach to running a business, there would even within that there would be room for people to think that it should be different ways. So there would still be potential arguments and potential feeling that what we're doing at any given moment is or is not ethical,
right?
Even if we all agree that it's play-centric.
Right. Or
interesting.
Right.
Okay.
Or you might say, look, let's say with the economic model, right?
Right. If we go to EA's example, their argument has been, people love these things.
They love surprise
people love
mechanics.
loot boxes. People
Right.
love loot boxes.
Right. Sure.
People love gacha games. I mean,
Right.
That's why you play them.
Yeah. It's and it's interesting, right? And if they said people love them, and they're saying they are meeting their responsibilities because people love them. So again, we would need to say,
if it's play-centric, then we're thinking about our players. Our players love this mechanic.
Right. It's possible. You could also say our players love this mechanic, but it doesn't make us money. But we have this mechanic anyway. We're just doing it for just to be good to our players.
Right.
You're on the philanthropic
it's a happy accident. It's a happy accident.
Happy accident.
It not only makes us a ton of money, but the players also love it.
Okay, well, in that case, again, notice we're back to just there's a bunch of different models you could apply. And the question with responsibility is always, we're kind of looking at what is the point where you have obligations? And this is how, right? This is where the philanthropic model is a little bit different than the others, right? With all the others, we're really talking about what you have to do, right? And here, right, with the philanthropic model is the only one where, okay, we have to make money, but then we also have a choice. So it's not just a happy coincidence. It's something that we got to do, and it also turned out to be good. Right. So that's where we would be. Let me say that in the corporate world, in the world outside of video games, people strongly disagree about what the responsibilities of companies are. I'd love to know what gamers think about this. And I think I have a feeling gamers would strongly disagree, just like the general population. All right, Andy. Good podcast, GP.
Good podcast. Good one.
All right. Play nice, everybody.
You can subscribe and listen to all of our episodes wherever you listen to podcasts.